Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Plomba. It is really great to be back, even though we are now in my personal home. We are in my personal office right now in White Plains, New York, and I'm thrilled to be back on this show. The world is in a very different place than when we last saw it. It's a place in which I think a lot of technological fractures and fissures have been illuminated for us. A lot of societal fractions and fissures have been illuminated for us as well. And a lot of financial fractures and fissures have been illuminated for us. I think across technology, society, and the economy, I think a lot of people have come to realize what truly matters. We say this all the time, day to day, when we hear that a loved one has lost another loved one, or if we hear somebody's lost a job, or if somebody's going through a hard time with one of their children. But I think in the pandemic, in the trifecta that we've been dealing with, I think that it's forced all of us to pause. And if we really think about the 20th century and the last 20 years in the 21st century, I think what humanity has not had an opportunity to do is to pause, to stop and to reflect. Every few years or so, the information that we accrue on technology and computers doubles, and our technological advancements have become quicker and quicker. But our abilities to pause and to reflect have not. In fact, it's been more and more difficult to shove in things into our lives. It's been difficult to balance all of our aspirations. But in a pandemic like this, it's forced all of us to really consider what truly matters. I recognize it's a platitude. It might be a phrase that makes some of us groan or roll our eyes and say, oh, not this. But I really do believe some things that do become platitudes, some things that are always repeated, are repeated just for that reason. And so it's important to recognize, as I pause in the beginning of this show, as much as I've been dying to see all of you, that it's important to reflect. My mother is an operating room nurse, and she has seen terrible things in the last few months. She has seen patients pass away from COVID-19. She has seen doctors and nurses have nervous breakdowns before entering rooms with COVID-19 patients. She has seen babies born and then contract COVID-19. And so this disease is absolutely very real. It is something that has brought and destroyed families. And it is something that has undermined the very societal fabric upon which we have all erected and built our own lives upon. This kind of reminder that the unknown is always around us is something that has really enveloped my attention the last few weeks. It's something I was recently speaking to a friend about, that the unknown doesn't really always leave us. We don't know how long our marriage will last. We don't know how long a loved one will live. We don't know how long that job will work out for us. We don't know how long we'll be living in a house or apartment. We don't know how long we'll have our pets with us. We don't know if our child will be with us for a great portion of our lives. These crises together, George Floyd protests, COVID-19 pandemic, and the shaken economy, have all illustrated to us that the unknowns are real. And while they may lurk in shadows and in the corners of our mind, they manifest when they want to. We have very little control over a pandemic once it's shown itself. We have very little control over a downtrodden economy when it shows itself. We have very little control over societal and racial-based protests seeking equality when they manifest. What we can do, though, is reach out to each other and acknowledge each other's existence and pause together to really reflect upon what's been going on in society. I do think through the quarantine, I do think through the downtrodden economy, and I do think through the protests for racial equality, I think we are getting toward a better future. I really do believe that. hopefully a future in which our food practices, the way that we harvest and raise animals and plants and other things that we rely on for sustenance changes. The way that we think about our economy, the way that we think about the way that we live will shift into gears that are more suitable for the 21st century, and that we will get closer, if not reach, racial equality through our society, through every fabric of our society, that we can come to a place in which we're familiar with what it means to treat each other with love and respect. So I'm quite hopeful that this trifecta that we're dealing with will get us to a better place. With that being said, let's get started. Today, what I'd like to go through is the movie theater business. And what I'd like to talk about is a study that I recently did looking at the ways in which we can predict movie consumption behavior. Most recently, NBC Universal released Trolls Worldwide Tour, the second installment of the Trolls franchise. This was much to the chagrin of movie theaters, but of course NBC Universal stated that it had to. This was in mid-March to late March. This was during the pandemic, and NBC Universal still wanted to release the movie to people who were aware of it and didn't want to try to remarket the movie months later. At the same token, AMC Theater and other movie theater chains were very much against the idea of movies being streamed, essentially taking movie theaters out of the equation. So what's been illustrated from NBC Universal is that, in fact, it can work, that Trolls 2 did exceptionally well at the box office, and it really was able to capitalize on hype instantaneously. And so the pandemic has served as a way to really accelerate technological change and really illustrate that there are other things and ways that should be considered in the distribution of movies. And so this study was born out of an article back in 2016 that looked at how movie theaters and movie film studios really weren't collecting data on consumers. That if we think about it, if you pay $30 for you and your girlfriend or you and your boyfriend to go to the movie theater, what's been collected? Not much. Even if you paid with your credit card, chances are the movie theater wouldn't have access to that information. It's proprietary in nature. And so movie theaters, of course, have, and they've been doing for some time, loyalty programs. Loyalty cards serve as a way to get around credit card collection or data collection on consumers to say, well, this is the AMC loyalty card. Every time you swipe it, you get points. Fine. They get more information on you as a consumer to get a better sense of your own behaviors and patterns. And when do you buy popcorn? Do you buy popcorn? Do you buy popcorn with soda? At what times of the year are you buying food versus not buying food? Could it be movie specific, which is a strange question, but an interesting one. And so all of these insights can be gleaned from movie theaters. But there was an article back in 2016 in Variety that it stated that, in fact, movie theaters weren't collecting data, and neither were movie studios for that matter. And so being in a business, it really took me aback to consider that a lot of these film executives were still kind of going on the fly, so to speak, with a lot of the business decisions that they were making with movies. It has since changed here in 2020, and more movie studios are eager to collect data on consumers. But this particular study, Consumer Personalities and Lifestyles at the Box Office and Beyond, How Demographics, Lifestyles, and Personalities Predict Movie Genre and Movie Platform Consumption, this study really sought to look at collecting external information. So the introduction. So this is a quote by Steve Jobs that really looks at the future of the movie business. What the studios need to do is start embracing the front end of the business, start knowing who their customers are, and to start building mechanisms to communicate with them and tell them when their new product is coming out. Selling films is going to get a lot more interesting, more precise, cheaper, and efficient. This was Steve Jobs at the 2010 digital conference shortly before he passed away. So this quote that was in this article from 2016 led me to start thinking, well, what information can we collect on consumers? And is there more data that can be collected? Movie loyalty cards will typically collect names, email addresses, and age. So to some extent, there is some information that is collected from consumers. However, demographics, to a larger extent, consumer lifestyles, and consumer personalities largely have not been collected by movie studios or movie distribution firms like movie theaters. A previous study in 1975 by Villani found that 8 to 21% of explained variance in TV show viewing could be explained through these particular variables. And so in looking at that, I started thinking about, well, could this be replicated with movie theater consumption or movie consumption for that matter? So what I was really eager to know were answers to two basic questions. How do demographics, lifestyles, and personalities predict individual movie genre consumption frequencies across frequent moviegoers? How do demographics, lifestyles, and personalities predict individual movie platform consumption frequencies across frequent moviegoers? So the movie industry at a glance. The movie theater industry accrued about $41 billion in 2018, which is about a 1% increase from 2017. As we see it, about 2/3 of movie business revenue is accrued overseas. And so the domestic movie industry is worth about $13 billion, and the overall movie business globally is worth about $30 billion, and that varies from year to year. 75% of North American consumers went to movie theaters at least once in 2018. We know that frequent moviegoers are very much inclined to be collecting lots of different kinds of technology platforms to use. So they're very much plugged in. Target population in the study was frequent moviegoers, people who view at least one movie per week on any device. I was really interested to see how these particular moviegoers or movie consumers were very much interested in consuming movies. So the theoretical framework. Here I began with trait theory. Trait theory looks at the ways in which our personalities vary over time. And so what it may look at is something like being extroverted. So one person may be extroverted, and on your extroversion scale, could be a scale from 1 to 10, you tend to be a 3 to a 5 on an extroverted scale. This could be the same thing for being introverted. So on an extroverted scale, you're on a 3 to a 5 on any given day. And so some days you may be a 4.2, other days you may be a 3.3, but you really don't leave that range. Range is fixed, it's bookended. From there then, that means that there's fixed variation. That also means that personalities, even perceived personalities that are reported by consumers, it's their own evaluations, can be used to predict behavior and can be used to predict a lot of different other kinds of behavior as well, including movie consumption. Psychographics and segmentation are often used here to help segment people based on reported personality traits. Understanding media consumption is based on 4 premises. First, we have individual differences, which are demographics. Second, program characteristics, which deals with movie genre frequency. 3, we have media habits and preferences, movie platform frequency, and cognitive and affective elements. And this delves into perceived personalities and lifestyles. Diffusion of innovation is also used here. Consumers that are young, high disposable income, are inclined to adopt technology. And of course, this deals with demographic information, and it also deals with lifestyles for that matter. That consumers may consider media platforms based around usefulness and differences from others. This is used as a looser framework. It's not directly tested here either. Variables. So the variables that I used here kind of fall into 3 buckets. So we have demographics here, which include sex, political affiliation, whether you're a liberal or conservative. And we also have race, education, and income here, as well as location. Additionally, I also was looking at lifestyle scales, just trying to figure out what kinds of scales I should be looking at to measure people's lifestyles. People going on vacation, playing sports. Do you collect coins? Do you model and work on cars, as a hobby or what have you? So I looked at the AIO scale, but there were too many indicators. Mitchell had a great scale, value, attitude, lifestyle scale. That was pretty good. Ultimately, 36-item lifestyle scale by Green, Cordell, Bez, and DeStefano, along with Mitchell, was used here, as well as innovation by Goldsmith and Fleming. So the goal here was to find a scale that was very comprehensive. AIO had several hundred questions, whereas by combining Green and Cordell, Bez, DeStefano scale along with Mitchell's scale, it made sense. It was still less questions than the AIO. And I also used innovation because I wanted to track the diffusion of innovation theoretical framework that I was talking about earlier, even though it's used as a looser framework in this particular study. Personalities, John Shrivasta scale was used here. It's shorter than in scope. There is the Big Five personality scale and several other scales. I do believe that there's still predictiveness here, even though consumers may not know truly who they are and perceive themselves to be some sort of other kind of person than perhaps who they are. It still stands to reason that if you do write yourself down as something, there could be predictiveness there. So even if it's people who identify as being honest, who aren't really honest truthfully, if it can predict movie consumption, if it can predict people watching a comedy, it may not matter to marketers so much because they're not really concerned about whether or not somebody is something, but whether or not by somebody stating that there's something, there's predictive value there that can explain variance in a data set. Method. So I employed the survey method here. I relied on a pre-test convenience sample from Amazon Mechanical Turk, and I used about 100 participants to go through the survey. And then I used a national random sample through Qualtrics once the survey was proofed, and I was able to secure 500 participants from there after data cleaning, deleting people who didn't complete portions of the survey and things of that sort. I had 301 participants left. And remember, the key determinant here for people to participate in the survey is that they had to be watching a movie at least once a week. I was really interested in frequent movie consumers, as these are people who watch movies quite frequently. They know what they like, they know what they don't like. They're very much attuned to this particular consumption pattern. Descriptive results, we have males and females. So it was about a 50-50 split, 49% male, 51% female. Ages were fairly dispersed across all life stages. As you can see, 18 to 27, 21%, 28 to 37-year-olds, 18%, 38 to 47-year-olds, 15%, so on and so forth. 37% of participants earned incomes of 60 grand or more. Cross race and ethnicity, it was pretty reflective of the US Census, the most recent one. Caucasians at 60%, African Americans 12%, and so on and so forth. Participants also identified pretty evenly across being liberal and conservative. We had 28% for moderate. Conservatives were about 21%, extremely liberal 8%, and liberal at 21%. Preliminary lifestyle factor analysis. So I ran an exploratory factor analysis with Verimax rotation here to reduce the amount of indicators necessary and to maximize the amount of data explanation possible from running this. And so with the list of lifestyle indicators, I tried to shrink it down to those that really explained consumer behavior in the data set. And so I had 3 scales that were developed here, the first being factor 1, travel and business. And so these were people who traveled by air for business purposes, lived somewhere else 3 or more months out of the year, commuted more than 45 minutes to work every day, work at home or telecommute, and operated their own independent business. So these are people who seem to be mostly traveling for work, although, they're also just traveling, even living somewhere else 3 or more months out of the year. But these are people who are commuting and they're traveling a lot, likely for business purposes, some of whom may even be entrepreneurs. Second factor that came out were consumers who were identified as indulgent. They were people who ate out at restaurants, ordered takeout, purchased items online, went on vacations, got together socially with friends. And so they were very indulgent in their own lives. Factor 3, informed, reading magazines, reading news, business or professional magazines, and reading newspapers as well. There is a fourth scale here. It's an innovation scale. Now remember, with diffusion of innovations here, this loose theoretical framework talks about being able to adopt technology. How open are you to adopting something new? How open are you in adopting a new piece of technology or a new pair of Jordans or the latest hybrid Honda, for instance? There's always kind of a curve that comes with this in thinking about innovators who are readily interested in waiting in line for the next iPhone, or laggards who may not get that new iPhone for 2 or 3 years because they're just not interested in it. It doesn't really matter to them. And so here, with separate innovation scale, the innovation scale here is used to look at how readily do these people watch new movies? How readily are people aware of these movies? Are people following blogs, or are people, interested in watching new movies and things like that for that matter? And so if we look here for preliminary personality factor analyses, and this is an exploratory factor analysis with Varamax rotation, participants' personalities revolved around being unfocused, reliable, and being creative. And the same principle here in which I developed 3 different scales. And so you can see here for factor 1, unfocused, these are people who were tense, depressed, careless, lazy, and easily distracted. They were identified as unfocused. Reliable, forgiving, trusting, considerate, cooperate, and helpful and unselfish. And then factor 3, creative, inventive, original ideas, active imagination, deep thinker, and reflect. And so here, you'll see that I posit the first question here. How do demographics, lifestyles, and personalities predict individual movie genre consumption frequencies across frequent moviegoers? Sex, personalities, and lifestyles are primary predictors of movie genre consumption frequency. So here, what we can see is that people who identified their sex and lifestyle and personality were very, very key in predicting consumption. So we can see here, we have political affiliation, your independent variable here, political affiliation, races, ethnicities, independent variable, sex, IV, lifestyles, IV, personalities, IV, and then genre, dependent variable. And so what we can see here is that sex, females, males, lifestyle, travel, business, informed, innovation, and personalities were predictive. And we can see for comedy, females and having identified as a creative personality predicted comedy, movie comedy consumption. Being male and having an unfocused personality predicted movie science fiction consumption. And as we go along here, we can really see how important lifestyles and personalities are, even more so sometimes than sex and other traditional demographic measurements. So here, how do demographics, lifestyles, and personalities predict individual movie platform consumption frequencies across frequent moviegoers? Lifestyles, races, and ethnicities, along with age and personalities to a lesser extent, are primary predictors of movie platform consumption frequency. So what we can see here is, traditionally in the movie business, we looked at age and we looked at sex. Younger females will like this movie, or older males will like this movie, or teenagers will like this movie. And while those metrics certainly are still relevant even in 2020, what we can see here is that there's unexplained variance that can be captured by lifestyles. And certainly Here we can see with platforms, the way that you live your life will really help determine the kinds of platforms that you may engage in for movie consumption. And we can see this again across laptop and desktop and smartphone and tablet and video game console. It's relevant. It's absolutely relevant to our lifestyles, how we select particular platforms. And again, we are seeing age young for laptop, and even some races and ethnicities may prefer certain kinds of platforms, be it Hispanic or Hispanic American for desktop, Caucasian, and African American for tablet. So in looking at demographics and in looking at personalities and lifestyles, it made sense also to look at the R-squared, the coefficient of determination, to really see how well these models perform. And so what we can see here is that for demographics, animation, 11% of movie animation consumption, 19% of smartphone consumption, movie consumption on smartphones, and 19% of movie consumption on video game consoles can be explained by demographics alone. When we add lifestyles to the mix, it goes up a bit. If we incorporate demographics and lifestyle measurements together, 14% of horror movie consumption can be explained, along with 14% for romance, 26% of movie consumption on smartphones, and 29% of video game console-based movie consumption can be explained here. We're not done yet. We incorporate personalities then into the mix. It goes up to 17% for superhero movies, 27% for smartphones, and 30% for video game consoles. So we can see here that it's quite possible to get near 20% for movie genre consumption explanation, and we can get to about 30% for movie platform consumption explanation through using these particular variables. But running multiple linear regressions has its limitations. It's good, but it doesn't really consider everything altogether. If we look back here, what I did was I looked at individual platforms. I looked at individual genres. I didn't really look at this in a holistic sense. A structural equation model really allows for this. It is meant to test interrelationships simultaneously by testing several multiple linear regressions at once. It's a very, very powerful tool, and it helps prevent type 1 error, thinking something is predictive when it's not, thinking that you have something statistically significant when it's not. And so structural equation modeling takes into account causality, it takes into account ordered sequence of events, and it takes into account variability between variables. So it really is a model that's predicated on really demonstrating causality within a model. Variables here, I use demographics, I use lifestyles and personalities. Innovation was not used here. Innovation was found to not be predictive during the multiple linear regressions that were run. It really didn't play a factor, and so I dropped it from this particular model. Again, personalities was comprised of unfocused, reliable, inventive, as lifestyles was comprised of travel, business, indulgent, and informed. Those scales are now placed together here. Variables and operationalization, movie genre frequency consumption included horror, romance, action, thriller, drama, mystery, crime, adventure, and superhero. And movie platform frequency consumption included laptop, desktop, smartphone, movie theater, tablet, video game console, and other platforms as well here. So hypothesis 1, frequent movie consumers' personalities, positive predictor of movie genre consumption frequency. Hypothesis 2, lifestyles are predictive of movie genre frequency. Hypothesis 3, 4, and 5, I looked at demographics, lifestyles, and genre predicting movie platform consumption frequency. And so here, the structural equation model was statistically significant, which is not what you want, because it means that the conceptual model is different than the actual data set. But the individual paths were significant. So the individual paths were quite powerful here in demonstrating that these individual relationships are statistically significant, but it does not fit the data. And so you can kind of see here what I'm talking about. Each of the paths were statistically significant, but unfortunately the model overall did not fit the data set. So a discussion here, trait theory is forwarded here as personality traits clearly possess some fixed variance to allow for prediction of movie consumption. Understanding media consumption is based on 4 premises: individual differences, program characteristics, media habits and preferences, and cognitive and affective elements. I do think this furthers this discussion along. This indirectly advances diffusion of innovation. It notes that frequent movie consumers with innovative lifestyles frequently use particular movie platforms. We did find that sex, personalities, and lifestyles can help predict movie genre consumption. We know that there's a bit of a bend toward lifestyles and race and ethnicity when we're thinking about predicting movie platform consumption as well. We also know that 30% of movie platform consumption and 17% of movie genre consumption can be explained here through this particular model. Limitations in future studies, high movie consumption frequency sample here, so there's limits in variation here. I think a future study should probably expand out the sampling pool to people who view a movie at least once a month. There might be more variation that's captured there. I relied on a young population as well as a US population for this matter, and so this is something else that should be taken into account. Granted, most movie theater audiences tend to be between 18 to 34 years old, and in their 50s as well. There's kind of 2 areas that really have the bulk of movie theater going audiences. And so that's something else that should be considered. The relationship between lifestyles and personalities and movie advertisement exposure and recall, I think, is a really good future study. I think it's important to think about what personalities are open to certain kinds of movie advertisements and trailers. And I think also thinking about where are people exposed to movie theater news in their own lifestyles is relevant as well here. How lifestyles and personalities may predict at what point movie consumers will see a movie during a movie theater run is also crucial as well. And so, as you can see here, these are kind of the breakdowns of the actual study itself. And I show the appendix here to all of you to note that it's sometimes crucial to have an appendix if you're in market research, because you can put further explanations about what kind of study that you ran in the appendix. But what you can also do is you can also include really interesting and innovative and surprising findings in the appendix, like little extras, little bonuses for a client or for academics if I'm presenting this at an academic study, a conference for that matter. And so in looking at this study and in really considering this study, I was really, really thrilled to have this published. I was really, really thrilled to have this, especially in the face of so much data collection out there, that I think the question for a lot of scholars becomes, not what we can measure, but what we're missing when we're measuring. It could very well be that even with Netflix, that while they're measuring what consumers do, there could be still unexplained variance that can come in handy across demographics, lifestyles, and personalities as well to really help hone in algorithms for that matter. And so when we think about the movie theater business and the movie business in an aggregate sense, I think it's a great opportunity to start reevaluating how we measure audiences and to really think about merging different data sets together. And this is probably the last kind of nugget I'll give all of you as I'm reflecting on this study. I think that there's this massive push to collecting data and collecting consumer behavior touch points, and it's relevant and it's practical, and it does help erase and limit error, which is what we're always looking to do in market research or in data analytics for that matter. But I do think that there's also an opportunity to merge data sets, which I know sounds heavy, but if there's a way in which that you can track lifestyles and personalities and demographics, and you can find that they're predictive, even if it's self-reported, placing that alongside actual consumer behavior data, I should imagine would raise R squares. It would raise coefficients of determination, and very likely you'd be able to produce even further structural equation models that can really help illustrate the power behind these algorithms. And so that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing, keep learning, excuse me. I'm very, very happy to be back. We will be continuing these in the coming weeks. Thank you, guys.